Welcome to Network Capital TV, everyone. I'm very excited to host my friend, Dr. Marcus Ranney, who's written a wonderful book, At the Human Edge. And in today's masterclass, we're going to deep dive not only into his book, but also into his larger, very adventurous career. So welcome to Network Capital TV, Marcus. Tell us who you are and what do you do today?
Thank you very much. It's incredible to be here. For everyone watching, I've been a big fan of what Utkarsh has done and built this incredible community over the last few years. So firstly, many, many congratulations to you for doing all of this. And it's a real joy to be part of this journey with you here today. I've been a very fortunate soul in that my career has allowed me the opportunity to zigzag across many aspects with a fundamental vision towards improving our collective well-being. And I think we can get into what that means later on. But that's sort of the objective of what I'm trying to do. I call myself the champion of well-being, and it's really been a headline, it's been the journey from sick care, because as a medical doctor, that's what I trained as. Ironically, a healthcare expert, very little health in the care we provide, mainly focused on pathogenesis and disease. And over the last 2 decades, increasingly moving towards the well-being side, where it's really focused about how can we augment this journey that we're on? How can we go as upstream as possible? And that's been my incredible journey so far. And I look forward to all the new adventures to come.
So doctor, management consultant, investor, at one point general manager of a large company in India, and now an author and a platform builder. So what connects all of them? Tell us if there's one unifying thread into all your adventures, or are you following your curiosity? What's this adventurous career centered on?
I'll add the title I'm most proud of, which is father. And I hope maybe we can talk about that journey later on as well. But that really
we fully intend to, Marcus. I've read the letters that you've written to your children right, on social media, etc. And I thought that it's brilliant. I think every parent should write and perhaps learn from you on that. So yes, proud father and all the other accomplishments to your name. Connect the dots for us.
Yeah, it's as I said, it's that journey of well-being. So when I look at what well-being means, I really define my objectives in a series of 3 concentric circles. The well-being of the individual, the well-being of the unit, the team, the organization, and then the well-being of the system. And I've reached the stage in my life and my career that has allowed me to invest my energies across each of these 3 facets, and we can explore them as we go along. But that's sort of the structural foundation of how I sort of frame my life and what I do at a career level. And it's truly in its holistic sense, right? So as a medical doctor, the lens was very much about the alleviation of suffering and hopefully the curation of the disease. I say hopefully because that typically doesn't happen much. It's more about the alleviation of suffering, which in itself is a fantastic endeavor and something that I've been reminded of as a frontline medic when the pandemic started, and some of the experiences that I got to do in the early months of COVID last year. But after that, how it goes on, it's really about the 4 channels of who we are. That's the body, that's the brain, that's the heart, and that's energy. Those are the 4 key components that I consider part of what it means to be truly full in our machine with regard to who we are as organic beings. And then, of course, there are many other facets, right? There's the financial aspects of well-being. There are the environmental facets of well-being. There's what you do at work. There's your relationships. All those other things also fall into that. But so if I try and think in terms of a framework, that's what I've defined for myself, and that's how I commit my time and energies. Yeah.
Excellent. So you grew up and you worked, and you're now working in different places. How did you decide to, move from, being a practicing doctor to being an investor, an author, and a healthcare or a well-being champion? Like, what was a fundamental question that you're trying to answer? And the reason I put this question forward is that we notice many doctors actually write phenomenal novels, talk about their experiences, etc. So does that medical training play a role in you evaluating healthcare in a broader ecosystem level?
I don't think the medical training plays a role in the evaluation. I think what it's really good at doing is probably two things. Number one is it's probably the most intimate career that you can create or that you can have, right? Because what happens, and I speak about this in the TED talk that I gave a few years ago, is that that doctor-patient relationship is sacred, because the person on the other side is coming to you in the point at which she or he is at their most vulnerable. And they're asking you one simple thing: please just help me become less sick. Please just help me with my suffering. So it's a huge responsibility, but that moment of empathy grounds you as a human being. And all of the bigger challenges that we perceive in our life, like mortgages and, politics at work and all the other stuff, right? That we think, oh, this is such a big thing. They pale in comparison when you remind yourself of that moment. So I always hold that true, because I put it in that perspective, right? Irrespective of how big a client I'm presenting to, irrespective of who I'm speaking to at the other end of the phone, I always remind myself that I've done something much more human before. And so everything else just comes on that level of priority. So that's number one. The second thing that I've learned over the years, and I think that comes through medicine, because you have to get used to talking. Because we're very lucky in this age. We've got so many incredible diagnostics available to us, from the wearables through the digital and the genomics and the personalized medicine. And all of that will continue to explode. But the incredible aspect of being a doctor is the clinical history taking. How well can you get that story from that other person? Because if you get that story right, then actually the diagnostics are just there to collaborate and confirm, rather than to try and just be investigative from the point of sake. So that ability to extract a story has really taught me how to tell a story. And I know you talk about this a lot, and I've been watching your masterclasses as well with regard to the importance of public speaking and communication, etc. But that's been a thread that I've been very fascinated about. And, I love reading like the scripts of famous speeches through history, right? And it could be anyone. It could be Winston Churchill's speech. It could be Martin Luther. It could be Hitler. It could be Obama. All those great orators. What goes into a very powerful narrative? Because if you are able to communicate an idea to a person, then they're part of your reality, right? Because reality is a construct of ideas, and each of our realities is different based on the stories that we say inside our head. So these are two things that I think, one of which, the prioritization from obviously being a doctor, and then that ability to communicate with other people, and the lesson of how important that storytelling is. I think these are things which I've tried to hone and hopefully have, put together in good use for the very different roles that I've had, but also in crafting together this piece of work as well.
And it comes together in your book as well, how you're essentially drawing upon different disciplines to make a point. And here, I think while you talk about Winston Churchill and Hitler, I'm pretty sure you're not extolling their virtues, but the fact that they were powerful orators, not particularly, of course, like that. I just thought I'd clarify for the listeners. So Marcus, connect the dots between your TED Talk, which was What Does Healthcare Look Like in 2030, and At the Human Edge, your latest book.
Wow. Okay. My fascination has always, and I think hopefully will always be, how could we extract the most out of this machine that we have, right? I love to think of myself as a biohacker, and I'm constantly experimenting with things, whether that's supplements, whether that's practices, whether that's ideas, whether what I'm reading, etc., etc. So that's the fundamental philosophy with regard to what I'm trying to do in terms of a construct. The book really brings the world of the outdoors, hopefully alive, into the indoors for someone who's reading it. And what I've purposely chosen are 6 extreme environments, 4 of which I've had the good fortune to work in, whether that's been Mount Everest, whether that's been putting a woman or man on Mars, whether that's been scuba diving, marathon running. We've got a chapter on the desert and a chapter on going to the South Pole. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to take the reader into the shoes of the protagonist. And what is it like to physically go on that journey? So in the chapter on Mount Everest, it's if you are climbing Mount Everest, what do you see along the way? What's base camp really like? What happens at Camp 1, Camp 2, Advanced Camp, etc.? And then once I've got you into that world, into that reality, now let's go in. What's happening now inside of your body? What are the changes going on in the way your heart's working? Because the oxygen is so low, right? Why is the oxygen low? So I'm describing to you what are the physics of altitude and how is it impacting your body, and hypoxia, which is a low oxygen environment, its effect on the body. And then as I go into that physiology, then describing to you what are the manifestations that you may be exposed to if you went on this journey. So acute mountain sickness, or cerebral edema, which is fluid on the brain, or high altitude pulmonary edema, which is fluid on the lung. So what does that feel like? What are people's testimonials for how that feels like, how you can treat it, how you can overcome that? And then, of course, it's the inspirational stories. So Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's summit of Everest. I've had other great voices throughout the book. I've tried to bring my own experiences of my field research in these different extreme environments as well. And so that, Utkarsh, that's the vehicle. So each chapter has been written in this style. So your journey to the South Pole, your journey of running a full marathon. And by doing so, I hope that number one, of course, if you're someone who's a runner, then it's an easy to pick up book because you will naturally be very inclined and have a high affinity with what I'm talking about. But if you're someone who dreams of running a marathon, or who dreams of visiting Everest Base Camp, or maybe one day summiting, or maybe has aspirations to be an astronaut, and remember, this is being written for posterity and the generations to come as well, then what is that journey going to be like? And what do you need to be aware of? And what are the stories of people gone by? So that's the whole premise and the whole idea. And, I hope it comes through. I'm really excited by it. And so that's the whole idea of the book. Now, answering your question, how it connects to the TED Talk, the idea behind the TED Talk, and this was something I gave about 4 or 5 years ago now, was, again, I love to dream. I love conveying stories. And if we needed to imagine what our lives would be like in 2030, rather than just thinking about what are the practical applications that we would have accessible, I've tried to think about it. Well, what if I were a patient in 2030, or what if I were a doctor in 2030? What would that experience be like? So the premise of the talk was that I wake up on the 10th of September 2030 after ingesting something that allowed me to time travel. And now I'm walking onto the ward. What does that ward look like? What does conducting surgery really look like? What does my experience treating a patient really look like? So that hallowed, sacred relationship, that doctor-patient relationship, how different is it because of technology, or is it fundamentally the same, spoiler alert, and it just gets augmented because of what's going on around us? And if it is augmented, what do we need to do today? Because we're really the designers of the future. The future isn't set. We have to design what's to come. So what do we need to do today to design for a future that we truly want? So that's really how I viewed it. And hopefully it sort of comes through a thread of good health and well-being along the way.
Yeah. Let's, before we dive into the other sections of the book, let's try and discuss the language a little bit. So this book is what you call popular science. So when you were choosing the structure of the book or the way you wanted to write it, who was your audience? Who was your core audience in the beginning? And I understand that evolved over a period of time because you rewrote parts of the book. Talk to us about the language, and then we'll talk a little bit about the whole rigor of getting something published as a next part.
Absolutely, because you're a published author and I'd love to hear your views as well. I wrote this book originally, and I dedicated this book to my 2 young children. And the premise of it was very simple. I would love for them to be as inspired, as excited by biology, particularly human physiology and psychology, as I am. And I thought that what a nice gift it might be for them to read about science from the words of their father. And I know when I'm older, I'll be much grayer and probably much more boring, and they may not want to spend time with me as much as they do now. So can I put something down which is almost like a time capsule for them? So that's the reason why I wrote the book, and therefore, if no one ever reads this book, it doesn't matter as long as my two children read it. That's the only two people that matter from a reading perspective. So that's the honest truth as to why I wrote it. And yes, there were many different iterations of it. And it originally began as a very, I would say, science-heavy book. It was very academic in nature. That was just the style that I was very used to writing. And remember, I started writing this 6 years ago. So I was in a very different space as well in terms of where I was in my life, what I was doing, and my own storytelling ability. And then through the years, through the long journey that it takes to get a book out to market and the various interactions that one has with publishers and advisors, etc., it went through 3 serial rounds of edits. And now it's I think incredible because it's much more accessible. Anyone can pick it up, whether you are a student of science or not. It really doesn't matter because I build on basic principles. But I hope that by the inclusion of bringing in history, legacy, geography, natural sciences, etc., all of that just makes it so much more inviting for someone to take in.
100%. And there are various sections of the book which we'll dive into shortly. But these 6 years weren't straightforward, right? You changed, I think, geography, sectors, professions, curiosities to some extent. So you also experienced a fair chunk of rejection while you were thinking through the structure, getting through. Talk us through that and what kept you going to the day that it's finally out there by an international publisher.
Yeah, so when I first started writing, I was a consultant. I was traveling a lot. I had just gotten married. My wife and we just got married, and I was literally on the road for 2 weeks, and then I would come back for the weekend and then would go out. So actually writing the first chunk, it was very easy because I was in hotels and on the road all the time. It took me about 4 months to write 80% of that first piece of content. And at that point in time, I then reached out to a couple of publishers, very wet behind the ears, obviously. And I submitted some online proposals. And they said, Marcus, you've got an interesting story, but we feel you should get an agent. And remember, this is before even self-publishing was a big thing. So, that methodology was still very common practice. So I reached out, I found an incredible agent, and she and I hit it off very well. She believed in what I was trying to produce. And in the course of 2 years, we must have made around 40 submissions, all of which were rejected. And that hurt because, you put your heart on your sleeve, you write something, and something which, as I expressed, was truly personal to me because of who I wanted my audience to be, that, to go through those rejections over and over, and then you start to question, well, is this something which is even meant to be out there? Or should this just be, a collection of letters and something that just sits on my hard drive that I give to my kids when they're grown up? So I had an honest conversation with my agent, and I said, look, you know what, I'm just going to take hold of this for a while, and let me just see where I go with this. I said, okay, I'm going to give myself some time. So, about a year passed. I didn't do much with it. And then one day I picked it up again and I said, let me just reread it. Let me relook at it. And let me see if there's something that can be done. So I started to make some edits to it at that point in time. I started to work on the rest of the book.
What kind of edits?
Language, mainly language. It was, I made it more accessible, moving away from just hardcore science. I started to play with this idea of putting the reader in the protagonist's shoes. And I did that with the marathon chapter, and it worked reasonably well. I was quite happy with that. And at that point in time, I also started to complete chapters 5 and 6, which I knew were going to be part of the set, but I hadn't done it up until that point in time. So I started writing chapters 5 and 6. And then at that point, I said, okay, you know what, this time I'm going to try doing things my way, to quote from a great Frank Sinatra song. And so I went on to Google and I typed in popular science, science, publishing science books or something like this, international publishers. And Google, who's the oracle of all wisdom, was very kind to me, and it sent me, these are the people who use. And there was one with an actual email address of an editor, and I said, okay, and Singapore based. I said, okay, let me reach out. And so I sent her an email, and the very next morning I received a response saying, dear Dr. Ranney, this is a really interesting premise. We'd love to have a word with you. And so the next week we were on a call, and she really liked it. She said, okay, send me the draft, send me a couple of chapters. And there began the news story. And so this was World Scientific. It just so happened that I was traveling to Singapore a couple of months later. So we met in person. We signed the deal. And from there on, it's been 2 years since we've reached here today. And the number of edits occurred after that. So, we agreed that premise of the protagonist as the reader as the protagonist is a good one. So I then had to rewrite all the chapters in that same framework, which takes time because you have to go back and restructure, do all of those things. Number two is I vastly decided to expand the non-scientific content. So bring in much more history, expedition, vignettes, interesting stories of legacies, etc., and do a bunch of interviews with people as well, and do some secondary research as well. And so that took some more time. And then as we started to put it together, my own life journey was going through such a transformation because I really got into long distance running, and I completed my first full marathon. And I realized through all of this, there's my search, my quest, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, I suppose, for people who haven't read the book yet, was always the physical aspect. When we think about these incredible expeditions, we understand, a lot of money goes in and equipment goes in, and lots of people have to build fancy rocket ships to get, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins to even lunar orbit and what it gets to get down. But what we don't appreciate is the physiology that goes in, the training of the human body that goes in. And so that's the journey that I was on to become a full marathon runner. And then it suddenly dawned on me that actually the magic isn't just limited to the body. It's what actually goes on in our mind, not the brain, in the mind, that allows us to get over that finish line. And so it dawned on me that this book was incomplete, that there was actually a missing chapter to this, which is the final chapter, which I call Mind Over Matter, which is what happens inside of that 1.4 kilogram organ that resides in your brain that allows these incredible human beings to achieve these incredible things. And then everything just fell in nicely together, and the whole book sort of took shape. We were originally going to publish in 2020, but as you know, a lot of things, the world changed. The global production of paper became a shortfall. So for many reasons, we decided to delay. But then eventually I thought, no, 2021, the start of 21 is the opportune time for two reasons. One, we've all come to the realization of the competitive advantage that well-being plays in our lives. It's a national security issue, it's a process issue, and it's fundamentally important at our individual levels as well. And people are hungry to understand more about their human body. So the timing of this was opportunistic from that perspective. And two, we've all been living in lockdown, frankly, and we yearn for the great outdoors. We yearn for these great adventures and to go traveling again. And until we can get there, hopefully in this year at some point, as the vaccine rolls out and as we get a greater control over the pandemic, let me at least allow people to travel in their mind's eye through the journey of the book. And so I thought January 21 was the right time to do this. So here we are today.
Yeah, here we are. There's this sense of wonder in your book, which I find fascinating. So let's try and you crystallize at the human edge. Like, what's the core value proposition of the book? And then walk us through any adventure, Mariana Trench or Mount Everest, because you've partaken of 4 of the 6, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So tell us the central value proposition of the title, what the book is about, and walk us through how you wrote any chapter, perhaps your favorite adventure.
The words human edge are very purposeful for me, and I'll tell you why. We each And I think this is incredibly important for your community as well, right? As we try and build our lives up, both personally and professionally, we try and attain certain attributes. Attributes could be things like agility, resilience, rapid learning, etc., productivity, performance, etc. These are attributes. These are goals that we set ourselves. And, of course, there are courses to get there. There are sessions like this to listen and exercises to do. But what I found to be very important is the human level, which is your biology, which is principally your physiology and your psychology, have to be aligned, attuned for you to achieve that attribute, right? There is no point you trying to be resilient if you're not imbibing the value. So if you don't sleep, frankly, if you don't sleep 8 hours a day, you can never be resilient because you cannot charge. Your physiology will never be in a position that allows you to face a challenge head on at a repeatable, sustainable manner. So that's the missing piece. And that's, where I spend the majority of my professional life now as a corporate speaker, as a business coach, etc., through the Human Edge platform. And that's the story that I wanted to convey. So that's why the word is even there. These two words come together, Human Edge. And the vehicle is simple. It's to bring the inspirational stories of the outdoors and take you on a journey of the indoor in your indoors to then bring you into that realization, right? So that's the first piece. Now there are many journeys, and all of them are interesting for a variety of reasons. But I think the one that I will always gravitate towards, and it's even why I chose it as chapter one, is my experiences on Mount Everest. This was a expedition that I did in 2007. I was a medical student at the time. And originally, Utkarsh, it was just going to be me and three other friends in summer holiday. We were going to do something interesting and go to Everest for the summer. And it snowballed. It really snowballed out of a passion for learning about the human body and thinking, oh, maybe we can do a couple of experiments while we're there. And people heard about it through med school, and people started writing to me to say, Marcus, can we join you on this expedition, etc. And it eventually became, it was a 2-year planning exercise, right? It took me 2 years to plan this. We had 100 people as part of the expedition. At the time, it was the largest research expedition to Mount Everest ever. The first of its kind to be led by a medical student. And we had 60 student doctors and then a team support staff of 40. We had 3 tons of medical equipment, and we conducted 17 experiments, including, measuring your ECG and your heart trace along the way. We took blood samples, we took oxygen measurements, we were measuring respiratory function, we were measuring mood and psychological state. We were taking saliva samples to measure cortisol and immune factor releases, all kinds of incredible stuff we did on the mountain. And it shaped me because it taught me the real aspect of responsibility, to be responsible for so many lives fundamentally on this treacherous journey up Mount Everest. And we went in August, which is actually not a normal time to go. Typically people go in the months of just around October. So September, October, November, and then December just before it gets really cold. August is the monsoon season. And so we had to go at that point in time because we were such a large group that we wouldn't be able to be accommodated if we went in peak climbing season. So we lost a number of bridges. We had landslides, we have avalanches, we had a helicopter evacuation. I had to send 2 people home off the mountain as well. And so there were lots of learnings for me. I was a young guy. I was only 23, 24 to be put in that position of responsibility. But I just learned so much. And therefore, I will always remember that expedition as a very life-altering journey for me for many years of planning and then execution, and then what happened with the science and what we learned. So that's probably my fondest expedition of all the things that I've done in my life.
Yeah, and reading this is really educational for the reader as well, because you understand a bit of science, a bit of psychology, a bit about crisis management, all of these. So I think for reading 6 such adventures, your book does a pretty cool job of, curating it, designing the experience. Marcus, I'm given to understand that At the Human Edge is now going to be a platform as well, if it's not already one. So talk us about the future plans of the platform that you're building, and how will your book be, say, utilized in different fashions by companies, startups, and other enterprises?
Yeah, I've become an entrepreneur. This is a new adventure for myself in 2020.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited by that. Human Edge is a platform. We're going to be launching it formally in February. We're just going through, for all the entrepreneurs out there, I've just closed my seed round. We're just going through the registration. We're going to become a Singapore-based entity. And I've already started to work with and service a bunch of clients. And the whole idea is really to be that performance coach for business. Because if one looks at a sports team, you will understand and you'll appreciate that they have physical fitness coaches and skill development trainers and nutritionists and ergonomic coaches and mental agility coaches, etc. Business leaders, business teams, business organizations require exactly the same thing, particularly now, after all the challenges that we've gone through in 2020. And as I come back to that realization of the competitive advantage that well-being plays, not only at the unit level life, which is at the employee, ultimately the foundation of our human capital system, but then going all the way up through our processes, business processes, leadership style, cultures, etc. So that's the effort that we're building out. So it's a series of advocacy, it's a series of interventions, workshops, content, one-on-one coaching, etc., that we really immerse ourselves in our business partners. And there are two very distinct products. There's a leadership product, which is a 100-day sprint that we work with a small group of people to get them through those different attributes. And then there's the organization-wide. So how can we move the entire culture towards that around productivity and performance, and working with them at these individual unit modules as well. Yeah.
I'm really excited to see how this unfolds, and more power to you. This book is the first of many steps that you and your company will partake of. Just wrapping up, there's a chapter which I found fascinating. It alludes to mitochondria. So do you want to tell us what it's about and why should people care about it? And why did you include it in the book?
I have a very strange love affair with mitochondria, to the extent, and it's still available on Facebook somewhere. When I was a medical student, on Halloween, I once dressed up as Captain Mitochondria. I made my own superhero outfit with a magic cape of affinity and a mask of resilience and the power of ATP. Mitochondria is a fascinating component of our cell. It's an organelle, so it's a component of the cell, and it exists to create energy. Its role, it's the energy production mechanism inside of our cell. It's actually from an evolutionary perspective, it was a separate organism. At some point in our evolutionary journey, we engulfed it and discovered how much it provides to us in terms of benefit, that we've kept it now. And so that's the role. Mitochondria produces energy. It brings the spark of life. And I've been fascinated with it right from being a medical student, because its role is obviously to create that energy, but its whole purpose seems to be around efficiency. The whole construct of mitochondria is around enhancing the efficiency. And I talk about it at different points of the book. It comes up in Everest. It comes up in the journey to Mars. It comes up again in South Pole. And I've actually dedicated a chapter to it at the end, which is more scientific in nature. And I really believe that the secrets of longevity, of our ability to perform, overcome chronic diseases, are all locked up in this tiny organelle. And I see over the next 20 to 40 years, as we better understand its biochemistry, as we better understand its biophysiology, etc., we get to a position where we can actually manipulate it to our advantage. Incidentally, even things which are commonplace today, such as intermittent fasting, these all are linked back to the role that it has on mitochondria, and how energy and metabolism is changed inside the cell, the different types of fuels that we use, how we metabolize different fuels, the ketogenic effect of that. So there's so much happening, and that's why I thought it deserves its own place in history and deserves its own chapter to it as well.
Well, it sure does. From that Halloween party till, your book, I think that character deserves a special mention. Wrapping up, any final message for our millennials and Gen Z around the world who are trying to create their human edge? Any thoughts, reflections, advice for them?
I think as we get older, we often get distracted by life, and we get pulled in many different directions, and the things that we hold most dear, particularly when we're younger, like playing sport and spending time with friends and looking after our bodies and our minds, we sometimes think that these are things that we can sacrifice in this pursuit of success. Success, by the way, folks, is defined by society. It's a delusion which is around collective money and wisdom, or power, money and power. But what we need to remember for ourselves, and particularly when we're very young, to hold on to that, is that success is who we are. What is it that you want to be as a person? And let that define what you do as people, and that will eventually lead to what you have. But remember that journey of be, do, and have. And I hope that you build in human edge and that ability for well-being to be part of that, because as you get older, the irony of life is then you get reminded of these things. And I'm in my late 30s now, and I wish I took better care of myself when I was younger, but it's never too late. We can each try and do what we can every day.
Yeah, this book is a hopeful one. Like, you can start and compound anytime you want. Marcus, more power to you. I loved reading this book, and I'm sure our community members around the world of Network Capital will enjoy it. And I wish you the very best as you launch your new platform, you'll scale the book further, and look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Utkarsh. To all the members of Network Capital, take care of yourselves. Thank you.